Thank you so much, Julia. That's brilliant. Fantastic to be here, and it's amazing listening to everybody's stories. My session is about reflection, but a little bit about me. So I'm a scientist, a biologist mainly, and education has always been in an area of my work. I am a qualified teacher, but I didn't do that until a second career. But I taught as an unqualified teacher at the age of 18 in Zimbabwe, and science was always been my love because it's something I could do. English was never an area where I excelled, largely due to my dyslexia, but science is where I fell in love with learning and also being able to share that with people, and therefore education has been a part of my work, whether I've been working in biological research and then into education. And then I started my tuition business 3 years ago now, before the pandemic, and it went boom, like I think a lot of people experienced. But I've always found reflection as a tool really, really useful, and I wanted to share a bit of a plan with you of how you can use a tool. It can be adaptive, and it'd be interesting to see different ways in how people might want to use it. So just have to bear with me 1 second. I just need to do my techie bit, which always sort of flummoxes me. So 2 ticks. And haven't found the right
We all
bit.
put on the same voice when we do that, don't we? I'm going to share screen now. I'm going to choose the right browser. Sort of say it to yourself as you do it, don't you?
Yeah, well, I was testing it yesterday, and yeah,
well done.
Hopefully, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the art of reflection, a 3-step plan? Excellent, I've got the right thing, because I've got 2 screens as well, so that throws me. So I use reflection with my students individually. I also have a small tutor team, and I work with graduates and undergraduates who are doing STEM subjects. So I've got some medics, physicists, mathematicians, and they're really fab because they're at the cutting edge, they're at university, and it's brilliant to get their insight into how they see things progressing, their experience in education. And one of the big things is to see how their relationships with their students develop and grow. And from what everyone has just shared, one of the most powerful things I think has just come out of that is building positive relationships. Every single story was about having those positive one-on-one relationships or with a group relationship. And so there's that trust. And when the learner has that trust, then that's where the kind of coming out of your working your outside of your comfort zone comes. And it's a really impactful when the students can reflect and see that themselves. I like this little quote. The last bit really resonates with me. Involve me and I learn. And so that's something I keep at the heart of everything. And again, when I'm having sessions with my tutor team, they're one of the biggest things I kind of ask all the time. Give me an example or chat about how your students have been involved in slightly different ways in your sessions, for example. So you'll see as we go through, I quite like the number 3. So you might spot that, so apologies on that front. And we'll get cracking. There are a few little things I'd like people, if you could pop in the chat, pick a question. It doesn't matter what the question is, but if you put your number by it, just thinking a little bit about feedback on reflection. Are they the same thing? Are they different? Are they similar? So we really appreciate it if you could pop that in the chat and see. I need to do my techie bit. I can't quite see it, but hopefully I will in a second. And so yes, it'd be really fab to see that input. Sorry about this. I can't see the chat. Okie dokie. So I'll have a little look at those later. In terms of feedback, if we have a little look at some definitions, again, I'm not going to go through a lot of it there. It is for people to have a little look at later on. The key thing is feedback tends to be given to the learner, and there's lots of different ways that we can give feedback. It's not necessarily something I want to touch on hugely here, but it's just bringing up and thinking about what feedback is and how reflection can be different. And if we look and see about reflection, what we want to look at is the actual learner being introspective and thinking about what it is they could be doing differently and helping them to become expert learners. So again, if you wouldn't mind, any words that spring to mind, if you could pop into the chat and see anything that associates with reflection, and I will try and sort my tech out so I can actually find the chat. That will be 2 ticks, but that would be wonderful if you can pop those in. Brilliant stuff. Oh, lovely. Thank you, everyone. I can see those now. Fab stuff. So yeah, lovely. Self-assessment. A song from Mulan. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. Yeah, stopping and thinking, really important. Giving the time and the space for the learner to kind of go, well, did that work for me? Do I need a different method? For the tutor and the student to have those conversations, to kind of pause and be able to say, is there another way of doing this? And asking those questions. So we can think about internalizing, deepening learning, and it is thinking about it. Brilliant. I love Disney too. Some of those songs go round and round. Brilliant. These are all really fantastic. I'm going to massively look forward to having a proper look at these afterwards. I do struggle with reading the information quickly, so I'm just going to pop up a few things that spring to mind here in thinking about what reflection could be, but it's lovely to see everyone's input there. And so in terms of thinking about how reflection is different to feedback, it's more on the emphasis of the learner inputting and thinking about themselves rather than the educator providing the feedback. And so if we think about the environment or where learning can thrive, in what situation, a few things to think about in terms of what processes are happening, what are the reasons for motivation, and also the impact of the environment that you're working in, that students are working in. All of these things can impact, and again, are worth thinking about, reflecting with your students. If you're coming across stumbling blocks, then these discussions can help. So another quick thing into the chat would be fantastic. Could you give me any examples of reflection currently in practice? So number one, what you might currently do. Number two, at a particular level. So it might be with colleagues, it might be with groups, it might be with students. So we can look at reflection on quite a few different levels. And also, do you have a particular purpose for reflection, or is it multifunctional? So that's my kind of 3 is the magic number. Would be wonderful to have a little look in there. And that would be fab. Thank you very much. So recently I've been doing some one-to-ones with my tutor team as it's coming towards the end of the academic year. Lots of year 11s and year 13s have finished. And so it's been a really great opportunity for me to chat with my tutors. And we've been able to actually use this 3-step plan to reflect on their achievements over the year, think about areas in which they want to progress their learning, and then think about what those next steps may be. Okay, that's fab. Oh, brilliant, Dee. I'm really pleased that that's been useful for you. Wonderful stuff. And this is fab. Again, I'm going to have to read
Nicola,
later.
you mustn't miss Lucy Saunders' contribution just above Dee's.
Okay, sorry. I will have to read that quickly. Okay, amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, Lucy. Brilliant stuff. I'm glad I have now actually found the chat properly. So these are really fab. And obviously we can all reflect in different ways, and that's really a great thing. But it's nice to have a format to think about if you're looking at reflection over a longer period of time with a particular student over a term or an academic year, or for example, GCSEs for 2 years. You know, a student going from year 10 into a year 11, it's really useful to think about what they've achieved and where they are going to. And so this, as you saw on the initial slide, is basically a ladder. And as educators, scaffolding is a great thing and a great tool to be able to use. I have recently worked with a brilliant team, and they've helped and produced a website. I've never had a website, and I found the whole thing massively overwhelming. And so we broke it up into chunks, and it just felt, that's so much better. And so phase 1 launched this week, which I'm very excited about. And then the plan is to carry on with the following next academic year and go from there. And so if we can think about when we look at a plan to reflect, we can look at what those achievements are. We can then celebrate those achievements, which are brilliant. And by reflecting back on those achievements, we can then look at step 2, areas of improvement, and discuss what those might be. And from that point, once we've actually worked out what those are, we can then take a step further to what are the next steps? What are the actions going to be? So one of the things I've found frustrating working in schools is that there'd be quite a lot of meetings, but often there would be no actual tangible actions, people going away and doing particular things. And it was very reactive rather than planning long term. And so it's, it's frustrating, but when you've got tangible outcomes of what people are going to do and be accountable for, that is quite useful in terms of your next steps. And it's very powerful, I found, with students over time, for them to get into the habit of finding a method that they can use for reflection. But one of the brilliant things about this time of year is getting some emails back from students and back from parents about how they have grown in their skill sets. So not just in maths or science, but they've learned particular learning skills that have helped them in the classroom become more confident, speaking out more, trying things out, working in groups, which is amazing. And that's the biggest thing, is to see that kind of growth and hear that back unprompted is one of the biggest wins that you were talking about earlier. And I've had some emails in the last couple of weeks from parents saying that they're most happy and interested about the fact that students are going to take skills forward for their A levels. And again, that is a massive, important, and I feel in a very privileged position that we've been part of that journey for the students. When we are thinking about reflection as well in the context, then you see my love of number 3. We want to think about why we're doing it, what model we might use, and at what level, where might that reflection be. And so it can be on a one-to-one basis with a group, for example, or, as I mentioned earlier, my example, tutor teams, looking and seeing it on growth of how tuition can be progressed. And then also I will reflect, I'm going to do this in July. June's quite action-packed, but thinking about it as a business as a whole, and again using that model and that process just helps me to get things in a framework and put it into the steps in terms of achievements, improvements, and what I'm actually going to do about it. What are those actions going to be? Now, the key thing is, where does this all fit in terms of educational research, and in terms of learners taking more responsibility for how they learn and what they learn. And one of the things I remember a lot about Parents' Evening, and common comments possibly with students in year 9, was they're taking the path of least resistance. They are letting the learning happening to them rather than taking control of it and taking things forward. And I would hear myself saying this time and time again, okay, so what can we do about reducing the students thinking, well, I'll just let it happen, and getting them to take more responsibility. And in that metacognitive cycle, then the reflect is a really important part of it. And so I picked out just a few snippets that you can see here from an article that was written. If people want to see more details of those, I have a slide with all that info later on. But it's the reflect part of this metacognitive cycle that I'm most interested in and can be really impactful. But what is metacognition? It's a good question. It's not a word we use in our everyday language, and therefore it is important to have sort of information and definitions and think about what it is. But it's about purposefully directing your own learning. So putting the student in in the position of driving their learning forwards. So they've got the steering wheel and they've got the gear stick. And also thinking about what cognition itself means as well, which is basically all the strategies that need to be put in place, finding those strategies that work for those particular students. And again, that all fits in with finding your own path for your learning. If we think about metacognitive learners, there are stages to this. So this is from the education research. You can see the reference at the bottom. And again, a reflective learner is part of that sort of hierarchical structure where they're learning a lot more. And so again, we're thinking about the fourth stage, from going from being tacit to being aware of what's thinking, but it's not a structured or a planned way. It's becoming strategic, and then to be actually reflective and strategizing and monitoring successfully. These are skills that students need help to be directed with. Some students and learners will do this more naturally than others. For example, my daughter, who is 10, she will naturally just do this. My son, who is 12, not at all. And that is them as individual students. Interestingly, she is not severely dyslexic, but again, her English is where she struggles. She finds joy in making things. Maths can be a strong suit for her. You know, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But she has that ability to reflect, which naturally is an amazing thing to be able to do. And so we can take that forward in terms of thinking what has been achieved, where can we look at to improve, and what things can we make steps to go to. So one example here is how those three things have been put into place from a GCSE student. And again, these are largely students' language that we type up together using the structure of what went well, even better if. That lots of students are familiar with within schools themselves. But if you think about the plan and the three parts of it, then you can see how that is next to it on that process. And in terms of the reflection, for this example, it was GCSE science, and the student was struggling in terms of looking at chemistry equations. And so we went through a particular method that worked for them, but then part of their improvements and what happens next and accountability is obviously to go through and do more work in those areas using the methods that they have learned, and reinforcing that with practicing and retrieving the information as well. I like to delve into the education research. I like the Education Endowment Foundation, largely because a lot of the information is taken from a large body of work, and also it's evidence-based. So I've just popped this in here as well in terms of thinking about, again, it's all to do with metacognition, but increasing that student responsibility so that they're getting the greater self-regulation and they are reflecting in a structured manner. And as you can see from the bars, then that responsibility is far greater as you go down, and sort of leaving the student to be able to progress their learning themselves, taking control, being in the driving seat. So again, number 7 is quite a nice number. For some reason, I like that as number 3. So that fits in quite nicely in that sense. So if we put all of these things together, we can think about what level we're looking at. So on a student session, for example, we would always have time, generally towards the end of the session, but we can pepper it throughout the tuition in terms of how our tutor team deliver sort of our tuition model. And putting that information down, the student talking through what they feel their achievements are. It might have been something, an assessment they've had at school. They might have got a better result in a test, and therefore that is something that we can celebrate with them. They also might have had some feedback from that to do with a particular subject, and therefore we can reflect on that. That's an area that they might want to do some more work on, and therefore the next steps could be actually next tutor session or the one afterwards, we're going to do some more practice on quantitative chemistry and some pesky mole calculations. whatever it may be, but it's specific to that learner and what they need. This can be done on a group level as well, with students actually talking to each other, breaking out on a larger session. And as I mentioned, it's been a really, really impactful for me recently to talk on one-to-one sessions with my tutor team to get their input and to put them in the sort of learner position to say what they feel has been really useful and what they want to celebrate over this last academic year. So this is a little quote. When I was just searching for various things, I came across a T.S. Eliot quote. We had the experience, but we missed the meaning, and reflection can hopefully help us to avoid this, that you get the meaning from the experience and don't miss out that valuable part in the middle, which can help going forwards. So I'm hoping that people can take away from here 3 things that we can think about to reflect. That the fact that there is a difference between reflection and feedback, and it is useful to think about where the place is for those. So reflection, very much getting the student to come out of their comfort zone and be able to think about their work and what they're learning and how they're learning, and help them to do that by giving them feedback at different levels, whether that feedback comes via school from assessments that can be discussed, whether that feedback is formative as we're going through the learning of the particular topic they're looking at. Secondly, the fact that it can be incredibly powerful to progress that student along in terms of their taking responsibility for their own learning, and to provide 3 steps to reflect. Hopefully it's an adaptive tool that people can use in different ways, with the example of the what went well, even better if, slot into it, but other ways in which you can use it is just to kind of think about how it might slot in. So for example, with younger students, they're very familiar, primary school at the Key Stage 2 are very familiar with 2 stars and a wish, which again is very similar, but it's finding that method or that process that works for your student and making it bespoke so that they feel they've got ownership for that as well. So at this point, if there are any questions, either in the chat or if people want to pop their microphones on, then there's sort of an open floor on that front. I do have my references. If anybody wants to pick up on any of those, then they are available, which is super. So thank you very much. Okie dokie.
Thank you so much. That was exactly the right topic for right now, wasn't it? Thank you so much for bringing that to us.
Good stuff. It's a pleasure.
Are there hands up?
Oh, I need to put my hand up.
Who was that?
I think Helen, did Helen wave?
Don't make me guess. Who would like to contribute? Unmute yourself and dive in.
Yes, one of the things as tutors we perhaps face more than teachers in the classroom are parents who are obsessed with grades.
Sure.
And are always asking you to grade your student. And obviously reflection isn't something you can grade. I mean, I'm trying to get my students to write some things that aren't essays at the moment. And I'm not entirely sure that's going to be successful. So how do you suggest we present this to parents as a valuable tool for the student? I mean, I think it's a very valuable tool and the student will use it all the way through their lives. They learn how to do it.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Thank you. I think precisely that. It is a lifelong learning skill to be able to reflect back on learning, but you can adapt it and apply it to other parts of life. It doesn't necessarily have to be about particular qualification.
Yeah.
But our students, we deal a lot with GCSE and A-level, and they are constantly assessed at school all the time. They get percentages back for this, grades back for that, and that is something that, in my opinion, and in how we tutor, we're avoiding.
Yes, it's kind of demoralizing, isn't it, that everything they do is judged, so it stops them wanting to do things.
Yes, definitely. And so what we want to do is take wins out of those different areas, and and even if they're saying to themselves, right, that was a rubbish test, or I'm no good at quantitative chemistry, then a growth mindset I'm no good at quantitative chemistry yet. We want to turn that around. And it's really interesting asking students to actually say those statements out loud in a session.
Yes.
And I always say, well, did your voice go up or did it go down? And they have to think about it and their voice goes up. How does that make you feel? And so by going through processes that are reflective and that don't necessarily involve numbers or grades or labels, it helps people to actually ask questions of themselves. What could I do and how do I break that down? Do I need to look at an alternative method? Do I need to find a different way of revising? So all of these different skills are super important that can be helpful going forwards. So back to your question about parents, I would just basically say on that front that it is long-term skills that students are gaining by being able to look at their learning across, look back, look forwards, and be able to apply that. And so some of the biggest things that have come out of it is the skills that students are taking forward across other subjects, which is brilliant because we only cater for science and maths. However, they are using their skills across a suite of subjects, taking those skills onto studying A-levels. And they might not be doing any science and maths subjects. That doesn't matter. So that makes me incredibly proud. They feel confident to use those skills going forwards. So that would be my sort of main message to parents on that front. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
You have time for one more, Nicola.
Okay, would anyone else like to ask a question or add anything in?
Very, very quickly, Nicola, can we have the slides afterwards? Can you get them to Julia or somebody so we can have the slides? I just can't read that fast.
Sorry, did I? Yeah, okay.
You are in the company of nerds here, Nicola. We want the slides.
I've got
particularly the references one.
Yes, absolutely. So I have, if I can get myself organized, sorry, it's my...
It's okay, Dolly, we'll put it in the festival guide.
Yeah.
We'll attach it to this presentation.
I was going to pop it in the link and I meant to do that. And I can do it very quickly. If...
You've got all the time in the world, we're here all day.
Oh, sorry.
No, let me wrap up now and give you some time to add the link when you're ready. I would love to pull out a couple of threads that have really struck me here. I think it was Dee, I think you just said that you also asked the students how you did. And I think that that's an absolutely beautiful way to show them what growth mindset really looks like. And the other thing that I think is worth pointing out is that really the premise for all of this is, what are we trying to achieve? And, you know, the question to parents who are chasing exam grades is, what are we trying to achieve? And the big goal, oh, there it is, oh, the juicy one. And the big goal that you're trying to bring your parents to is understanding about transferable skills as well as exam grades, especially at this time of year if you're continuing on with your students. So I think that it's an immensely productive learning objective to work on reflective practice with your students. I was also really, really struck with, Kaylee, I'm picking on you again, it's because I'm pleased to see you, what you mentioned there about leading your team and having one-to-ones and coaching. Nicola mentioned this a great deal. And I think that point, Kaylee, when you said that you run out of time to do that one-to-one practice, does anyone have any insights? I mean, I've got my school leadership hat on and I'm sort of shuddering on the inside here. What do you do when you run out of time to do those one-to-ones, Nicola?
It's kind of working backwards and making sure we put that time in. It's really important. With my team, I've got 7 graduates and undergraduates, and we have 4 nightly meetings. And some of that time I hand over to them and they can input, which is really great. We're going to plan some sessions over the summer where we're going to basically share best practice, split up into maths, split up into science. Everybody prepares a few little bits and sort of talks about what they found useful with particular students and why. One of the most amazing, well, powerful things, and really, really something I was really chuffed with, when we had these one-to-ones, because they're all separate, is the priority that came out of their achievements was their positive learning relationships with their tutor, with their students, sorry. And as they are not qualified teachers, this is one of the biggest things I've said can be most impactful, is that learning relationship, that trust in the learning, that engagement, those conversations about something to do with what's been on the television or what favorite music do you like. All of those things can be really, really important. Them chatting about their experience at university, how they're really into their degrees, and, you know, the work that they're doing. It builds that relationship, and they're positively talking about how they feel that the students are gaining more insight to what they're doing because they've got that positive learning trust relationship, and then the students can kind of take that forward, and reflection can be powerful to help that process go along.
Oh, I love that. I love that you just put positivity and reflection side by side. I've just seen Dame Alison's slides come through for tomorrow, and she's going to be talking about positivity and professionalism. So there's definitely a thread there. And I think it's lovely that it's trickling through the culture in NK tutoring. And it's defining everything that we're doing right now. So I think that's really, really glorious. Thank you. Nicola, thank you for that stunning presentation. You've left us with plenty of meat to work with. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, so